Hey guys, you're listening to the Tascha Labs podcast, and today I want to talk about the multi-chain thesis because for those of you who have your long-term memory function relatively unimpaired, you know that remember back in 2021, you saw every other day a new blockchain pop up, right? Something that's going to overtake Ethereum. And the multi-chain thesis was very popular at the time. You had the meme of Soluna of X at the end of 2021. And I myself, I was very bullish about this multi-chain thesis because I was saying, look, guys, liquidity in the crypto world is increasing and user base is diversifying. Not everybody is going to go to Ethereum. And also Ethereum main chain was really, really slow in the top of bull market, right? So different types of communities and use cases gotta aggregate at different levels. So you're going to see these, new things popping up, new blockchains pop up that will get their own tractions, and then eventually everything will need to be connected, right? But that was based on the base assumption is the liquidity into the crypto metaverse is going to continue increasing, right? But then 2022, you see things abruptly went the other way, and then in a few months, this all the other blockchains, including L2s and L1s, the liquidity TBL or user bases abruptly just dropped throughout 2022, right? So this is obviously now it all sounded it felt like a distant memory because things happen so fast in crypto. But I feel it will be useful at this time we see the crypto market is taking a breather, right? So after last year's significant drop, now we are stabilizing. We'll see how things go, right? But that's another discussion. But today I want to discuss where we are in terms of this multi-chain thesis. Is there a there still, so to speak, right? So for that, I invited my friend Sergey Gorbunov who's the founder of Axelar, who's basically live and breathe this multi-chain world every day to join us on the discussion. So this should be interesting. I'm very looking forward to hear what Sergey has to say about the multi-chain prospect going forward. Hey, Sergey, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Great to see you again.
Okay. So just for those who don't know, can you just give us, loop us in on what is XLR and what it's doing?
Yeah, so Axelar is a decentralized interoperability network, right? Its job is to connect different blockchains, different layers that are fragmenting the blockchain ecosystem and unite everything together. At the end of the day, we want to enable developers to build across the whole of Web3, and we want to enable users to interact with any asset, any application, any chain with one click. And so Axelar is building the infrastructure to get us there along the way.
So you started when?
We started 2 years and a bit ago.
Yeah, so in 2021, early 2021?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So when you started, it was this multi-chain world was just starting to emerge, right? And then it grew rapidly at the end of 2021, and that was the hike, and then promptly crashed down everything. So how has it been for you and throughout this roller coaster? How are things going now?
I mean, things are still going quite well, I think, for Axelar, right? We're continuing to see increased activity. I think, what we try to do is build a network and a stack that can sort of pivot and actually adjust to the market demands, right? And be universal and generic enough. I think actually when we're starting out, there was no multi-chain thesis. There was actually Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? And our first go-to-market was bringing Bitcoin to Ethereum, right? And people, oh, this is going to be awesome. But we built really the stack to be able to plug in new connections as easily as possible, right? And then when we saw the multi-chain, activity on other chains, on avalanches of the world and things like that, we actually just plugged them in at the protocol layer. We saw a lot of traffic and things like this. So yeah, kind of building the stack that's robust and sort of generic enough that you can adjust to the market dynamics, I think is actually, quite important. And so, Bitcoin is still not live on the network because we've actually had a lot of, demand from other providers that wanted to have connectivity.
Yeah, so well, you got a tough job because like you said, things change. Like you gotta like be flexible. Um,
Yeah.
well, but every infrastructure like all the work like you have to do to invest in building stuff, and then you also need to be very sensitive to the demand conditions. So I'm curious to know like compared to like now compared to maybe a year ago, or a year and a half ago. How is your outlook? How is your outlook about the blockchain fragmentation or segmentation or multi-chain world has changed?
Yeah, I think my thesis, on multi-chain is still very strong, and I think it actually relies on very technical aspects of it, right? Like the reality is that, if you trace it back, kind of why we saw an explosion of other, layer ones and layer twos is because Ethereum could not provide a consistent, reliable environment for the users during high peaks of transactions, right?
Hmm.
Gas costs were very high. People were like failing to submit their transactions. And we actually saw that last week, right? When like a swap on Uniswap was, like $500, right? Like during another peak. So the reality is that, one chain on its own has a certain limit of how far it can take us, right? If we are to continue growing the Web3 ecosystem with more applications and more users, right now we're like super small, right? Like as an ecosystem, right? The amount of users and the amount of traffic that we generate is like nothing comparable to, kind of a Web2 applications.
Hmm.
But if we are to continue scaling, bringing more users and more applications, you're going to have to isolate resources at the technical level, right? Like meaning that, your application could run maybe its own environment and provide a consistent user experience, right? For your customers, my application could run like in a slightly different environment, or maybe it's the same environment, but we're still very isolated in terms of performance. So that when there's time, like my transaction still costs me like $1 or $10, not $500, right? Like, if we have these types of peaks in user experience, we're not going to be able to grow the space. And so this is, I think, my fundamental thesis is that if we grow, there are going to need to be more resources that are available. Those resources can be available through different ways. Like you can have sharding, you can have layer twos, you can have layer ones, you can have data availability layers, all those components. And then the question is, how do you kind of stitch them together, right? How do you connect all those layers? So right now we're back to lower levels of activity. You can submit transactions in a cheaper way on one chain and things like that. But that's not the world that we can end up with if we're growing, right? If we keep on growing, you just have to isolate resources. Web2 doesn't run on a single database and a single network for very technical reasons, because there's no single database that can support all of the traffic. And so I think in Web3, it's fundamentally very similar.
So obviously, in over the past 12 months or so, we've seen the reverse happen, right? So in 2021, so 21 started, Ethereum had like basically 100% of the TVL in the crypto world, and then a year later, it dropped like 40 percentage points or something, like a very precipitous like drop, right? So right now it's back to like I think the lowest was like March, April of last year, and now it's back to like about the 60% of the TVL. And also the Ethereum L2s also grow over last year. So I'd say like maybe the entire like L2, L1 add together, maybe 70% of the crypto world. Why do you think that this consolidation happened?
Consolidation happens because I think people want to go to the safe ecosystems,
Mm-hmm.
right? The ecosystems that are going to be there for a while, the ecosystems that they're familiar, and the ecosystems that have the biggest communities, right? That's, I think, reason number one. And reason number two is, like, to your point, I think layer twos are starting to pick up more and more in Ethereum. They offer, cheaper transaction fees, offer better developer environment than the layer one itself. The way that I view actual layer two is like it's actually its own chain with a single bridge to Ethereum,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's how you can think of it. But the environment there, is pretty good. It still kind of has close proximity with other layer twos, and yeah, I think people want to experiment less, right, in these types of activities. So they want to go to kind of the safe house, and I would say Ethereum and layer twos has been like the safe house.
Yeah, so then the Ethereum maxis would tell you, well, this is going to be the way. because L2 is going to take over all the things like you want cheap and fast transactions. You can all, do that using like Ethereum L2. So other chains will not have a chance, basically. What's your view on that?
It may be, we don't know that, but I think the point is that layer twos actually need interoperability just as much as layer ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
So right now, layer twos have interoperability, like I said, like with one bridge Ethereum, and it's actually very expensive and slow in many instantiations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we actually work directly with a lot of layer twos, and we've seen a lot of activity from them, like Arbitrum, right? Like Optimism is going to go live. I think we're going to work with the base chain as well. So yeah, like layer twos are still different networks that need interoperability. I think that's one thing. Even if layer twos kind of end up dominating the whole world, you still need connectivity between them. You still need efficient routing. I think the second point that I think I just want to make is that there's a very big difference between like the way that people have been thinking about interoperability, which is like, how do I connect A and B?
Mm-hmm.
And what does the user and developer experience need to look like when we are in a world of even, let's say, many layer twos, okay? In that world, the developer doesn't want to have to think about how do I build like on this chain or that chain. They just want to be able to deploy everywhere potentially their use case. Like let's say you're launching a token, you just want to launch it everywhere and have users interact with it. To do that, you actually need more than interoperability protocols. You need various like application layer interoperability protocols. You need infrastructure to deploy, to manage across multiple environments, to be able to perform efficient updates, and so on and so forth, right? And so that's how we view, some of the role of Axelar and the stack that we're building is just thinking about, it's not just how do I connect A and B, but how do developers build in the world of many, let's say, layer twos. If layer twos end up dominating, if there is, hundreds of layer twos, how do you build across all of them, right? It's not that easy, and you actually need like a very specific infrastructure to do that.
But so if I'm an application, like why would I want to do that though? Why can I not just build on Arbitrum, and why do I need to deploy to other chains?
Yeah, well, look at Uniswap as an example, right? Like Uniswap deployed on one chain, then they deploy like on another chain, then deploy another chain. Like, what's the point? You want to grow user base, right?
Right.
Arbitrum maybe has some users, maybe Optimism has some different users. You don't want those users to be disconnected, right? At the end of the day, as a user, you should be able to go and use the application with one click, right? And if application is not designed in the interchain or multi-chain world, whatever that is, you are creating a friction for the users, right? And whenever you create a friction for the users, I think then we're just fighting in the onboarding path to get more and more users to benefit from this technology, right? So as a developer, yeah, your point to deploy multiple chains is distribution, distribution and distribution, right? You distribute your liquidity, you distribute to more users, and you have much better, simpler user experiences that new users, as they approach your application or your ecosystem, can interact with it without having to think, how do I move my tokens back and forth, right? Which is very, very painful.
Right. So I think okay. So it sounds like you are saying this. Well, I think the real world analogy will be like, if you're Coca-Cola, you're a U.S. company, why are you gonna expand to China or to Brazil just to access new customers? So the same rationale is for blockchain applications. Was the underlying assumption that the clientele, the user base of different chains, do not overlap 100%, which is I don't know like how true that is, but I think in Ethereum ecosystem you probably overlap more, because if I use Arbitrum, I'm definitely using Ethereum mainnet, but still you can. If we see some growth going forward, even just from the Ethereum ecosystem itself, you're going to have some differentiation, because the L2s will have to differentiate themselves in some way by specializing or providing some, specializing in certain sectors or certain features. Otherwise, it's very hard to compete, right? So I agree with your point. It's, it's essentially making it easier for the developers to get additional distribution with relatively less hassle, right? So how do you do that, like in terms of your approach?
Yeah. So I just wanted to make one more point. It's before we talk about how we do that, I think the other good analogy you can actually think of is like, let's say you're building like a Starbucks, retail store, right? You want to give a consistent user experience to your users, right? Even if it's the same user that goes from one chain to another, you want to make sure they can come in and actually access your application. They know what coffee they're going to get, right? They know what to order and so on and so forth. And I think like providing that experience to even the users that travel across these layer twos, right, is what you want to offer as a developer, and it does require kind of connectivity across your applications. So how do we do that? To your question, we do this by building what I call is like full stack interoperability, right? So meaning that at the networking layer there is a core kind of routing infrastructure protocol that connects, chain A with chain B, layer 2 with layer 1, and so on and so forth. And that layer can route information, route packets and messages, right? So you can think of it as a kind of an air transit control system where you can take a flight from one city to the other, But then on top of it, there are various layers that we're building to enable the developers to build these types of experiences, right? And enable the simple user experiences that include things like gas services, right? So as an example, you're a user on Arbitrum, you want to execute a transaction, and that transaction actually needs to be executed like on the Optimism, okay? The previous way of doing it is that you bridge manually your tokens, you execute another transaction, you swap, maybe you go back to your original home chain. So it's a lot of steps along the way. With the interoperability like infrastructure, gas services, you can let user execute one transaction that will then take place and execute across multiple chains without them even have to pay gas, right? So they would pay gas only on the source chain. So you can think of it as like account abstraction techniques, right? Where from the user perspective, you don't think about how to interact with individual chain. You can submit your transaction in one chain, you can pay gas only once. And even if that transaction needs to execute across like two different dexes or two different chains, it would still go through and you get your result where you held your wallet, right? You don't have to think about everything else. And so this is what we call as like a service layer built on top of Axelar that developers can leverage to build these types of experiences. There are additional services that we're building, like Monitor and SDKs, simple deployments of script and so on and so forth. And so that's why I call it like a full stack of interoperability, whereas there's the core transport layer, right? And then there's a service layer for developers and users to actually abstract the complexity of interacting with multiple chains.
So are you seeing what's the demand growth are you seeing in that type of use cases? Because you gave an example, right? Which I think is a little bit abstract, but especially in this market conditions, right? So what's actually the demand for that kind of use cases? Because we've been talking about like cross-chain messaging since for over I think it was like a really popular narrative maybe like a year ago or so.
Yeah.
But then really, I think part of the reason is general market conditions, right? You haven't really seen the need for cross-chain messaging has dropped because liquidity has concentrated back to the Ethereum ecosystem. So I think that's really like that. That's like a short-term business cycle impact on this kind of use case, so to speak. But is there a long-term use case for this type of functionalities? Including what we said, like doing like a one transaction in one chain, then there should be some other actions to take place on another chain. What is have you seen like much of like a concrete examples for these type of use cases taken off?
Yeah, so I think one concrete example that I think is taken off more and more is to be able to do kind of a cross-chain swaps in a decentralized way, right? Very, very simply. So right now, if you want to swap one coin for another across different layer ones or layer twos, what do you use? You mostly go to a centralized exchange,
yes,
right? And it will custody your funds, and you can do those transactions. I think there's been a lot of talk in the industry about how do you make this, decentralized, right? Like how do you have really decentralized DEX or a combination of DEXs that can swap, ETH for AVAX in one click, right? And this is the use case that we're actually seeing more and more demand on. There's like a protocol called like a Squid router that went live on top of the Axelar network. And it's actually done very, very interesting, and where it composes existing decentralized exchanges using, stable assets to route liquidity between them, right? So the idea is that you have some liquidity maybe on Ethereum main chain, maybe you have some liquidity on like Optimism in a DEX. You don't want to have to build new liquidity to just swap, Optimism token for like Ethereum tokens, right? But you can combine the liquidity together using stable assets, right? So maybe every token on the source chain is paired with a stable asset. Every token on the destination chain is paired with a stable asset. And so for a user, then you can enable one-click experience where you say, you submit a transaction, it gets swapped for like stable asset is routed to another chain, gets swapped for another token, and you get a token on the destination chain. You don't have to do all those 5 steps manually. It's like one click, and then the transaction is getting executed, right? So this is a use case I think that we're seeing more and more demand on. The other use case is actually around stable coins and stable assets, right? So kind of a Circle, we're actually working with them on kind of helping them compose USDC through their bridging protocol and like the Axelar infrastructure, where similar questions come up where, I think actually Circle was a first user that experienced the pain of multi-chains, right? So they launched on Ethereum, then they're like, oh, we need to launch like on layer 2, on this layer 1. And then they're like, oh, how do you make sure it's the same USDC, right? Like, because every bridge will create their own version of USDC. So they started going back and saying, what is our interoperability story now looks like, right? And that's something I think, we're helping Circle, but we're also seeing a lot of other, stablecoin issuers, or even like, central bank digital currencies that are researching the space still, but they're trying to understand, if I build on this chain, how do I make sure my coin or my stable asset is available from other chains? How would developers interact with it? How the users interact with it? Do I have to build like new liquidity and things like that? And, I think interoperability and being able to issue assets in an interchain native way, right, where it's available on all chains from the beginning, like you can move it back and forth. You don't have to think about fragmentation. I think for the new asset issuers is pretty important.
Yeah, so you mentioned like in terms like cross-chain swap, for example, you said cross-chain swap through stable coins, right? So you basically route the stable coin from one chain to another. When you say route, do you mean like just like burn the stable coin in one chain and issue on the other chain? Or what's the mechanism for routing, like in terms of Axelar's approach?
Yeah, great question. That's where it depends how the asset was issued, right? If the asset was issued on one chain and then you use Axelar, you can create its sort of wrapped versions on all the other chains. Then, if you go from the home chain, then it gets like locked in the protocol. Then you get like a wrapped version that gets minted, but then the wrapped version is automatically swapped for the native version. So you don't actually see that wrapping and unwrapping, right? For the new generation of assets that we're seeing that are what I call is like interchain native from day one, then they're automatically like burnt and minted across chains, right? If the asset has been issued before, then you have to like wrap it and wrap it. But if it's interchain native, then you burn and mint it. But all of those mechanics, I think it's important that actually abstracted away from the users, right? So if an application is built to leverage these protocols, application does all of that stuff. From a user perspective, it abstracted away. They get like native assets right away. They actually take very minimal bridge risk, right? Because there's no like big liquidity or like wrap pools of like tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars they have to deal with. You always end up with a native asset. So it's I think the next generation of applications that has both the assets issued interchain and like thinks about the UX and the design actually takes very small, security risk and has a superior UX.
Yeah, I can certainly see that to be better. Though if you have like 2 chains and you have USDC on those 2 chains, you're still like 2 separate liquidity pools. So in that sense, it's like still not really that efficient, right? So you have to swap on Ethereum main chain and swap the other side, and you have to have sufficient liquidities for like all the token pairs involved on these chains. Is this something that we can solve in the future? Do you think that it will still like continue to be this case?
No, I don't think it will continue being this case, right? I guess like when you say it's not as efficient, you mean like from the economical side, right? Because you have to do like two swaps or things like that. Or when you say inefficient, like what are you referring to?
You have like you need to like have like liquidity pools for USDCs on whatever chains you want to swap to, right?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I think like the reason this kind of works today is because you don't have to create new liquidity pools or anything else. Like you can demonstrate the use case. There is another level of like interchain native applications that I think some developers exploring. How do you do that completely natively, right? So you can always imagine creating a pool between an asset on one chain and an asset on another chain, kind of directly by passing messages back and forth and synchronizing the state of an application, right? In the same way as like on Ethereum, why can you create a pool between assets on Ethereum? Because you have an application that has visibility in both assets, right, and knows what's going on with them. So with the general message passing kind of a protocols, you can do that across chains the same way, right? You can say, my part of my application logic lives on one chain, part of my application logic lives in another chain. When the user pulls in, maybe they pull in like their liquidity on both sides, and we view this as a uniform pool of liquidity, and we have better capital efficiency and so on and so forth. It will take a little bit longer for these types of applications, I think, to emerge. I think we're seeing something with like cross-chain borrow and lending protocol. So like Prime protocol is one example where they're building a complete like interchain experience where you can deposit token from one chain. A message is sent to another contract on another chain to release like a loan against it to you. So yeah, I think we can do better economically, but it will take kind of a re-architecture and redesign of some of these applications to be interchain native.
Yeah, and we probably don't have the demand condition to support that at this stage. Um,
I think at this stage, yeah, like things like just composing applications across different, layer ones, it seems like sufficient enough
mm.
for, a lot of the use cases. And like, you can continue tuning in the parameters and make it a lot more sort of capital efficient.
So, what are you seeing in terms of like usage growth in your different segments of your user bases? Which chains or you mentioned like cross-chain swap is sort of like a growth area, like I would say like a more of a immediate like a basic kind of use cases in the short term. What are the like some of the chains or some other like application you're seeing growth like recently?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of traffic historically we've been processing between like Cosmos and Ethereum chains, or Solidity chains like Ethereum, like Arbitrum, some of the other layer twos. I think now we are starting to see even more traffic like through layer twos. We actually have a dashboard like doing analytics. It doesn't have all the chains, but I think it captures all the chains. So Arbitrum, I'm looking right now at it, like has the most user growth. Avalanche is still pretty solid and continues to grow. Ethereum continues to grow pretty rapidly, and a lot of like Cosmos traffic.
Yeah, is this public? Can people look at your dashboard?
Yeah, it's public. I mean, there are two things. There's like axelarscan.io, which has like pretty comprehensive things. And then Dune Analytics, there's a duneanalytics.com/Axelar network/Axelar. I think Dune doesn't capture all the chains that we support, so it's only like 6 chains that they actually index, but you can see it there.
Okay, great. We will post a link. Okay, if people want to check it out. So you mentioned so we've established that there is a demand, for applications to deploy cross-chain because people want distribution and new user bases that they have low cost access to. So that is like a basic foundations for some kind of demand for like cross-chain messaging protocols like Axelar. And you mentioned one like a main challenge for developers to do like a cross-chain applications. It's the cost in deployment, complexity in deployment. What are other challenges that you're seeing for the like cross-chain applications to take off? Because obviously we haven't seen a whole lot so far.
Yeah. I mean, I think we haven't seen a whole lot because the infrastructure is not there yet still, right? Like, I mean, I think we're building a part of it. I think a lot of other folks are building. Like I said, it requires like a full layer. So as a developer, what do you need? You need the cross-chain protocols. That's like the basic, okay,
Mm,
checkbox, great. Then you need like simple SDKs and APIs you can use, right? That's like a layer has to be there. You need monitoring, right? So when a user submits a transaction from one chain, you want to know where it's at,
mm.
how long it's going to take. You want to help it speed up if it needs to, and things like that. So you need like a monitor and a data layer, right? What else do you need? Well, you actually need, kind of a, recovery layers, right? So for instance, if the transaction doesn't go through, like somebody has to be able to, submit it and execute it, right? So you need that. All of those layers actually take time to build, right? They're not, 6 months projects. I think if you look at the development of the internet, like all of that interoperability infrastructure was developed for 20 years, before a single application like email used it, right? In the blockchain space, I think we're actually in a reverse position where we saw some demand in the very early days, right? Like within the last bull cycle. But the infrastructure is going to continue being built, I would say, over the next, the next 5 to 10 years, frankly.
So how about securities? Do you think that is preventing people from doing any like more experiments with these like cross-chain applications?
Yeah, I mean, security is a big topic, right? We've seen, all kinds of hacks throughout the last year on the security. That's again, I think, an artifact of a lot of pull for the technology from the applications of layer ones during the bull cycle, and like people rolling out like very immature, ad hoc like bridges and like solutions that don't make any sense in the long term,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so they all got like compromised. They're all pretty centralized for practical reasons. So unfortunately, it had a big, stain on the interoperability. But it's nothing new than with any other new technology, right? Like we saw it when centralized exchanges were first being built. Like every second exchange was hacked that actually doesn't follow, good security practices, right? And people end up losing money. We saw it like in DeFi as well, when DeFi, like everybody was shipping an application, put in funds, and like a lot of people end up still losing money, right? Like we saw last week, unfortunately. So, and the same thing with interoperability, when there's a demand, like a lot of people kind of create ad hoc solutions, you get compromised. So it takes time to build things correctly from a secure perspective. But I think to my point earlier, if you actually build your application in an interchain native way, you can minimize the security risks, right? So things like cross-chain swaps, you actually take in a very minimal ephemeral risk during the process of your transfer, but there is no like, you don't need to build like hundreds of millions of liquidity of extra things. And so as we get more and more to leverage like general message passing and interchain native deployments, the risk that you will have to take on the underlying interoperability infrastructure will be kind of lower and lower.
Got it. So another thing, related to this is I'm sorry that you must have answered this type of question 1,000 times. But I have to ask because like when we talk about any new technologies, new applications. So your approach to like cross-chain messaging in terms of your infrastructure architecture is like different from some of your competitors, right? So people can go research, you can go research yourself who are the competitors of Axelar. So what do you like from your point of view, like what's the pros and cons in terms of the architecture that Axelar built?
Yeah, so good question. Yeah, I think like on the very high level, right, I would say you can characterize two things. A, kind of Axelar is a decentralized network on its own, right? So, and I think a lot of the other competitors, they're more centralized, right? Like they have like centralized relayers, oracles, validators, whatever those components are. Centralized technologies, it's very easy to roll out across multiple chains, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exchange has been doing that for the last, 10 years. You put a database, you put like a couple of validated nodes, you read messages, you write. It's not rocket science. How do you make it actually decentralized? Well, that's much harder, right? How do you make sure it's robust and, reliable and has strong liveness and safety properties? You have to have decentralized stack. So So it's definitely kind of a harder to build, but that's the technology that sort of lasts, right? At the end of the day. So that's one point. I think the second one, I'd say like a lot of our competitors think about how do you build bridges and connect A and B. And I think what we're trying to do with Axelar is build an interoperable network, right? So it's a blockchain. It actually, it has its own like virtual machine layer that we announced a couple of weeks ago. And you can build at the interoperability layer various protocols and various connections, right? Customize your security, be able to, extend your security model, be able to issue things like, naming services at the interoperability layer and so on and so forth. And so but that's the big differentiator, I would say, between what Axelar is doing and a lot of competitors, where they talk about kind of a message passing, right, and things like that, which is fine. And we're trying to build like an interoperability network that has different properties and different ecosystem, and it has like translation, it has routing, many to many, and so on and so forth. So you can think of it as I would say like, abstractly, like difference between building like a railroad between like A and B, right, or a bridge, and building like a airport hub, right, where you can come in and you can fly to many other destinations, and it's like very efficient and like optimized for travel, right? And so Axelar is kind of an airport sort of hub that has kind of good properties and connectivity.
So when you say like yours is more decentralized, in what sense, if you can like elaborate on that?
So the Axelar network is based on proof of stake consensus. Mm-hmm. So it's a decentralized validator set. The validators in the Axelar are responsible for processing cross-chain messages, right? So every time you send in a cross-chain transaction, no individual, is authorized to authorize this transaction. It's the entire set of Axelar validators that have to reach a consensus, and only then the transaction gets, relayed and posted on the destination chain, right? So you have security through decentralization. Every validator has a very, unique deployment environment. So you have diversity of deployments, right? And that's how you get security. And for a lot of other approaches, it's like one or two, like oracles or relayers or validators that are just running and validating the message. You don't actually have a large committee of members that are authorizing messages. So that's the difference.
So do you think there is any kind of cost or speed advantage regarding Axelar's approach? Because decentralized, more secure, that's well and good. At the end of the day, unless something terribly wrong happens, like when sun's shining, people don't care whether how decentralized or undecentralized you are. But people do care about, other properties, other features that allow them to do things cheaply and quickly. Yeah. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, no, for sure. I actually think at the networking layer, I would have to check, but I think we connected more chains than anyone else, mm-hmm. right? The reason is because Axelar is a programmable network layer. So that means you can program it to do things efficiently. And if you have to repeat something 10 times, you can put it at the network layer so it's repeated, 10 times with one transaction, mm-hmm. right? So, onboarding like EVM chains for us, like a couple maybe days of like testing, but then it's like literally 4 or 5 transactions you run on the network layer, and then the EVM chain is onboarded.
How fast can you onboard a new chain, EVM chain?
EVM chains, we onboard the new chain like every 2 weeks right now.
Okay.
Right? So on the EVM layer, and most of it is just testing and just making sure all the other services get plugged in. Mm. The actual connection of the network layer is very, very efficient. I think the second property is that because Axelar serves as a hub, every time you make a connection, you automatically interoperable with everything else that's been connected, mm-hmm. right? And so that's a property of a hub-and-spoke model versus like peer-to-peer connections, right? So in a peer-to-peer connection model, if you and I are connected and I'm connected with someone else, if you want to talk to them, you have to set up another connection, right? You have to establish another path. With Axelar, you don't have to do this, right? If we all connected to one protocol, one network, and so you have very strong like composability effects of the network itself. And yeah, I think back to your point, certainly it's not all about security, but I do think a lot of it actually does come down to kind of programmability, right? And the fact that we can code a lot of logic at the Axelar network, with the VM layer, developers can code themselves now. So we actually have like a bunch of projects there. People making connections with like Near, with Polkadot, with other ecosystems themselves, right? And like we're helping them. This is the template. This is the format to follow. And so that's a power of a actual network, right? Where you can have contracts that people can reuse, right? People can modify, can rewrite. And so, yeah, I think to your point, that's where it's going to be our key advantage over the long term is the fact that you can we have a shared programmable environment at the network layer.
Okay, that's interesting. So I don't know if you have a view on this, but I'm curious. Since you deal with you onboarding new chains all the time, do you have a view in terms of the direction of chain architecture in terms of general purpose versus application specific? Well, like which one are you more bullish about?
Great question. I mean, I think there's a need for both of them. I know it's a kind of a maybe political answer, but it's actually technical. It's
not going to pass. Okay.
Not going to pass. Okay. How about this? Here's what I tell to the developers, right? Usually, frankly. So when they say, which chain to build on, I tell them, look, like, what are you actually building? Do you have a product market fit? If you don't have a product market fit, if you just experimented, go launch on a general purpose chain that has the most liquidity, the most users, like get a couple of users, make sure people actually like your product, right? So that's all you have to care about. Just go and build, on the cheapest, on the most liquid chain. From there, the question is how big can your application get and where are you going to scale? Okay, so if your application demands a lot of traffic, a lot of transactions, you want to make sure that your application stands there, during high peak hours and things like that. Then you need to think about, how do I isolate your resources, right? And then potentially like an app chain is more suited for you, and you should go and do that. And we saw this with the DYDX, right? That's exactly what happened. They built like on general shared environments. They said those are not good enough. Then they migrated, to Starkware. Now they're saying, okay, now we have to go to Cosmos and build our own app chain. Why? Is because they know there's a product market fit for their application, right? They know there's the users, but they need to have full control of their stack and resources and make sure users always pay cheap gas and like the transactions get processed and not bottlenecked. And so they go to their own stuff. So it is much harder to build your own app chain, right? You should not do it from day one if you are launching an application that you don't know like has a product market fit, right? You just experiment. And so I would say kind of app chains and general purpose or app chains are there only when you know that you actually, building something that people care about, so you can invest the resources to scale it and to control the full stack. If you're a couple guys in a startup and like finding a new DeFi application or NFT, just go build on like general purpose chain that has the best, the most users, the most liquidity, get a product market fit, and kind of see what your growth path is.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And also, what I suspect is it's market conditions, because it's in this environment, it's much harder to take off as any like single application without secure like a liquidity backing to start from scratch, right? In this bear market. And also I think what's going to happen is you would start to see some experiments from the larger like Web 2.5 kind of projects. They start to move to their own chain, like Reddit has Polygon NFTs. They can have other NFTs on other chains, but at some stage they could have their own chain, have their own swap, and if they are big enough, right? So those kind of applications with existing user bases, they can port over to Web3. And they start some of these app-specific chains, and as technology mature, the cost of deploying decline. At some level, I don't know if it's going to be. I hope one day. I think it will be. I think one day it will be as cheaply as like deploying like a Squarespace website, is that kind of thing. But that's a little bit far off. But aside from the blockchains, do you see any other, technologies in terms of distributed ledgers that are seeing some green shoots, so to speak? Because so a few years back, before like the crypto crazy, like a crypto bull cycle started, like blockchain was not the end all and be all of like decentralized database or computing, right? So people were talking about all sorts of distributed ledgers. Any of that getting any traction still?
I don't think so, right? Like I think, it is sort of a pretty much narrative driven, right? And I would say like a blockchain has like the narrative that, this is the technology that you use, right? To to kind of build a decentralized and robust system. To your point, I think the topic's been around for, decades, right? Like from both kind of research and like experimentation and like, and some even products been built around them. But I would say, yeah, kind of the narrative of blockchain and the ecosystem kind of evolve on its own, right? That kind of created its own like parallel trajectory to the universe. With some kind of a institutional corporate like clients that we chat with, they actually like deploy pseudo blockchain distributed ledger. I don't actually know what properties it has, right? I think like some of them are actually blockchain, some of them are just decentralized systems, and they want to connect those with actual public ledgers, right? So I think that's an interesting, kind of longer term, but a pretty interesting connection. To your point, like I don't actually think blockchains should be or will be disconnected, right? You should be able to say, maybe this part of my application logic needs to be posted on a public ledger. This part of the application logic needs to be in a private ledger because it has like my customer transactions or private information or IP information that I need to protect, and like those things will just kind of talk to one another, right? And what you have in the private world of private ledger may go under different names and and words, blockchain, distributed ledger, whatever makes sense, I would say. But it's a very good point.
Yeah, so I asked because I was just talking to on another episode I did was we are going to see some like these CBDC or enterprise level kind of pseudo blockchain solutions, as you put it, start to emerge, right? So what's is there any is there existing technology stacks for connecting these different solutions, or is there something that is like not just like a blank space right now?
Yeah, I mean, pretty blank space, I would say for the most part. So we're chatting with some of the clients that want to launch these like permissioned or blockchains in one way or another, and we're helping them like spec out how does connectivity look to the outside world, and how does liquidity flow back and forth and things like that. It is a pretty blank space. I think it's blank because they're still figuring out a lot of their stack in parallel, right? Some of them are customized, some of them work with like Polygon, right, to launch like the supernets, all in the earlier phases. It's clear that something will happen, right? And I think pretty real use cases and interesting use cases, but because you're dealing with a lot of like corporate venture, right, and like traditional like processes in legal structure, I think things will just take longer there.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I do think that some of them, they will come to some level of fruition, whether how good what's the quality of the product or what's the adoption level, that's a totally different question. But my mental model is things like, if you look at Netflix, which started this like video streaming thing, and now it's like every large media company is having their own similar service. Now it's like streaming is like a very commoditized thing, right? It's not just Netflix anymore. If you look at other, like another example is like you look at the payment transactions. You had like startup type of innovators like Venmo, right? And then now you have the traditional TradFi banks networks. They have their own similar kind of services. And the whole space has become like a commoditized. But I think my point is this is something that I see happening in blockchain or in the distributed ledger or whatever Web3 space in the future as well. You will have like a Web3 concepts that is evergreen, But how those concepts are executed in the infrastructure level, that will like diverge over time. But anyway.
What do you think, FedPay is based on? Do they use any type of a ledger on the back end?
I think it's just SQL.
There we go. It'll be interesting to see. I think like some of the other, kind of corporate banks, right? Like what they actually end up doing. I think like you have a lot of these like stablecoin discussions, but I think some of them, like you said, like just SQL databases, right? Some of them are more decentralized.
So I'm going to ask you like my most the question that I'm most looking forward to ask fund founders is what have you learned as an entrepreneur? Like share with us some entrepreneurial wisdom, because I know like you're like a very smart person. You have like you were like a PhD and you're a professor. You have like academic background, right? So
yeah. Okay, good question. I guess first is I think it's pretty naive. I think a lot of people are saying this, but I think like the people that you start working with at a company kind of matters a lot, right? And kind of choosing the right team for the type of company that you're trying to build, I think is really really important. Everybody says this, but certainly a lesson that I learned, part hard way, part good way. I think the second thing, I mean, especially like last couple of years, like you have to have a, really, really tough skin, right? To survive in the space. Like it's been frankly, an emotional roller coaster,
you have to
right?
be
I think
fireproof, waterproof,
fireproof,
earthquake proof.
waterproof, bank crashing proof, stable coin crashing proof. Yeah, I mean, like to me, that has been like, I think one of the things which is sort of being able to detach sort of emotions, right? Sometimes like deal with like in crises, like there's, projects going down, banks going down, like bugs and like things like that. And I think the crypto space evolves so rapidly, and there's, pretty significant like value or at stake usually whenever you're building like interoperability, right? Like, we launched it in like first week we had, 100, I think over 100 million in like volume, right? Like that's, for a protocol that's sort of fresh, it's a lot, right? Like, and it takes time for these technologies to mature. So, yeah, and I would say like to me, I think that's the biggest thing is having a really kind of taking care of yourself, making sure you kind of exercise, you do all the right things, knowing when to decouple like emotions, so you can like jump, in the crisis and actually, be able to navigate. I think is pretty hard. And I think the last thing, I'll just mention is like we did it very deliberately, but being able to prepare for volatility and like cycles, right? I think crypto has like the cycles every couple of years, up and down. So if you're trying to build a long-lasting company, you have to assume there is going to be a cycle, a year or two from now. It may be an up cycle, it may be the down cycle, and then you have to change your strategy based on that to make sure you can account for both things, right? In a good cycle, you want to have all the right pillars in place. In a bad cycle, you need to have enough capital, right, and kind of resources to kind of survive and continue building through things. And so yeah, to me that's the final pieces. If you're building something long term, like assume things are going to go bad and think what your strategy is going to be on that, and assume things are going to go good at some point and like think about what's your strategy on that.
Yeah, think 3 years ahead. Yeah,
exactly.
Very good point. Well, on the upside though, when you're 100 years old and you're writing a memoir, you will have no shortage of materials to use.
For sure.
Well,
I have to record some of it. It's like 1 week is like a year, right? Like it just goes by so fast.
Exactly. Well, Sergey, thank you so much for the conversation today. It's been so much fun.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.